All right.
Perfect. All right, Steve, so we are recording. We will be clipping this part off, and it is all yours.
That's awesome. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Steve Havill. I'm the board chair of the Bay Area chapter of Conscious Capitalism, and so excited to be here with all of you guys. We ended up doing this first event. This is at full occupancy. We had 100 seats for this event, and we're so inspired by the turnout. And it's an experiment. This is the first of many online courses and or community gatherings that we're working on. And sorry, I'm getting text while we're talking. To be able to really open up the practical application of conscious capitalism and take it into a virtual environment so that we can really support you, introduce you to the team. And that's what this call is about. We wanted to really showcase some members of our team to be able to have them have a chance to share about one of the most important aspects of conscious capitalism, which is conscious leadership. So that's what this call is really about. It's going to be, it could be a little messy. We'll see how it rolls out, but I'm just super excited to be here with this amazing crew. Let me set the table for this conversation. First and foremost, if you're new to conscious capitalism or if you've been around the fire for a while, hopefully this call is contextual and useful. As a review, let me just kind of lay out this idea of conscious capitalism. Is first and foremost, what is it? How does it apply to your life? And first, I will say that above all things, it's an idea. It's a stand that we can actually elevate humanity through this beautiful thing called business. And it was pioneered by John MacPhee and Raj Sisodia in a book that came out in 2013, but the work had been going on long behind that, and we are standing on the shoulders of giants. There are so many people that have contributed to having this movement be such a beautiful example of what's possible in business. And so what I'd like to do is, in addition to sharing that it's an idea, this purpose of our organization to elevate humanity through business. Secondly, it's a movement. It's a gathering of people around the world that come together and volunteer their time and their talent and their treasure to support this beautiful idea and scale the impact of business as a force for good. There are over 40 chapters around the globe of conscious capitalists. I'm pretty deeply involved with all of them, and we all crowdsource and share together. And we've got probably maybe 7 or 10 different states and countries present on this call because they're curious about, like, what are we doing in the Bay Area? So one of the cool things about the Bay Area is that in addition to it being a hub of innovation and forward thinking, we're also blessed to have the international movement headquarters, Alexander McCobin and his team right here in our town. So we get a chance to be a laboratory and a beta test site for a lot of ideas that get incubated here and then rolled out to the larger ecosystem. And I'd like to take a second and share, for those of you that aren't familiar with conscious capitalism, just a very high level view of the third piece, which is that conscious capitalism is a practice. It's a philosophy. It's a way of being in business that's modeled and represented by these 4 tenets we call the 4 tenets of conscious capitalism. The first is higher purpose, that we believe that business exists for a reason beyond making money, to add value in the world, to really create some value, and that all that comes back, all of the revenue, all of the impact that they make is a direct result of adding that value. And it becomes the measure, the North Star for any organization, for decisions, for collaboration, all of that. The second piece is this idea of stakeholder orientation or stakeholder integration, which really means that every voice matters. We move beyond the old world of extracting value, and we get into a deliberate, intentional effect of the use of really creating shared value across the entire ecosystem of stakeholders in the business. And so people feel heard, recognized, and when you bring that collective genius together, the impact is phenomenal. The third is what we're going to talk about today, conscious leadership, which really is comprised with this body of what we call intelligences, which is a fancy way of saying the things we practice as conscious leaders. The first is EQ for emotional intelligence, the second SQ, spiritual intelligence, and the third SYQ, systems intelligence. And that all goes along with what you're already bringing to the table in your IQ. And so I'm excited for the team to unpack those distinctions today and talk a little bit about how they apply in your life. And then the fourth is in many ways a natural byproduct of the other three, really firing on all cylinders, which is conscious culture. So every business has a culture, whether it's deliberate or whether it's by default. Many times it's the water cooler culture. So a conscious culture really creates a space that moves from a culture of I to a culture of we, where there's a real deep inclusion and appreciation of people's gifts and talents, and that we know that we're better together, that we have a space and an opportunity to create trust and collaboration and really tap into that sense of collective genius that's in service of this higher purpose of the organization. So that's just a 50,000 foot view of the 4 tenets, conscious capitalism, and that's really how I'd really love to introduce this, is that I think right now it's probably a more important time than ever for us to start with the idea of conscious leadership, because that's really what the world is hungry for right now, is more servant leadership, more people that are heart-based, that are community-focused, that are interested in more than just for me. They're interested in how can I serve, how can we be better together. So it's important to add some context that in addition to the movement being a practice, there have been, part of the challenge that we face as conscious capitalists is how do you convert that from concept into action? And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but just know there's a lot happening in the movement, including a project that some of us on the call are a part of called the Conscious Capitalism Activator, which is designed to do exactly that. And we'll share more about that in future events. But just know there's no right thing, no right way to be a conscious leader. There's no such thing as a prescriptive approach to this model. This is very agile, it's highly dynamic, and it's an area that we practice together. So it's a continuum of learning, and the goal is to really find the you are here spot on the map to say, oh, okay, here's some new growth edges for me. Here's some new areas that I can focus and like that. So I want to front load this conversation by saying, look, unlike a lot of other webinars or things you might be on nowadays, there's no sale at the end of this. There's no big program we're going to pitch to you at the end. Our hope is that we add value and context, that you get a chance to meet our community and get a sense of who some of the leaders, and it's just a portion of our team, are that are in service of this great idea. And none of this would be possible without John and Raj and the founding fathers and founding mothers, including the brothers and sisters that are with us on the team from different chapters around the world right now. So I want to thank all of you because we are really standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of what we're out to do with this great work. So that's my quick setup, kind of setting the table. Mauricio, I'm going to call on you. I happen to have a friend in town, Mauricio Goldstein, who was part of the initial founder of the Brazil chapter. And I'd like to take a beat before we turn it over to Robert and the team to introduce these different intelligences. I'm going to turn my phone a little bit, introduce you to Mauricio, and then I want to hit him with a question. So let's see. Hang on. There you go, buddy.
Hello.
All right.
Everybody. Yes.
So Mauricio was not only a founding father of the Brazil chapter, but he's also a world-class author, speaker, partner with this organization, and one of the most beautiful and heart-based conscious leaders I know. So my question for you, brother, is if you would open up this call by sharing just a quick highlight of why is conscious leadership more important than it's ever been at this time in our evolution as a species?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here, Steve. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. So I would say that for me, as we evolve technology and we see evolution in terms of human values, I think the concept of leadership itself is changing. Yeah? And that means that I think leadership is moving from a concept of stock, meaning an inner capacity that people have, like, oh, I'm a leader, to a concept of flow. And flow, it becomes then a relational process. So there is no leader without a follower. Yeah, and recognizing that leadership is about relationship, I think that's an important shift. Yeah, and I think the other thing that is really critical at this point is that leadership is about vertical evolution. Yeah, conscious leadership. So what does that mean? That means I think leaders being more, rather than direction givers, being more architects or designers of spaces, of organizations, of experiences that people will have. And how do we help people to thrive? And how do we cultivate organizations where people flourish themselves? Yeah, rather than the old leadership, which was a directional leadership or order-giving leadership. So it's really about designers of experiences. And that's why I believe leadership is critical, but it's not the same thing as we talked about before. Leadership before was something different. So it's really about rethinking the concept of leadership itself and then how it is expressed in the world. So I'm really looking forward to hearing.
I told you, total badass. So happy to have you here. Thank you so
Pleasure,
much.
Steve.
Let's turn this over to Robert, and Robert, introduce the team and crack this thing open, and then I'll come back at the end to wrap it up with you guys.
Perfect. All right, so let me get this thing set up the way we need to be. Speaker view, perfect. And yeah, thank you, Steve. And you can hear me, right? I unmuted myself. Perfect. Love the perspective from Maurizio, and thrilled that he's here as far away as Brazil, which represents really what we're up to on this call, which is, I still have you guys on the screen. Kate, can you let me know if you're seeing me? We want to make sure that the speaker is being featured on the screen. Steve, are you seeing me?
I'm seeing you.
Okay, perfect. All right. So again, Mauricio, your perspective is beautiful, rich. I think it also points out that in the hour that we have the opportunity to just scratch the surface on a really juicy conversation. And hopefully we can all look at this as really just getting started on that conversation. It's also an opportunity for our leadership team, the board of CC Bay Area, to introduce ourselves a little bit to you, for you to hear from us and get to know us a little bit, and give us an opportunity to demonstrate practicing what we preach in terms of these tenets of conscious capitalism, and to again scratch the surface on what Steve set up with the three different elements, the three different intelligences, and you're going to hear from three of our amazing board members on that. Before we go do that, I do also just want to acknowledge Steve. One thing about the people who lead off the call, sometimes they don't get the introduction and the recognition that they deserve. Steve truly is the leader of this organization in every way imaginable. He has navigated it through some difficult times recently and is really getting it on track in amazing ways right now. Some really great things happening. And he really does live his commitment to this organization and to the tenets of conscious capitalism. So thank you, Steve, very much for your contribution and your leadership. So with that, we're going to dive right into this conversation about conscious leadership, and specifically about the three intelligences. And first of all, there's actually four intelligences. There's one that's very commonly talked about called analytical intelligence, the one that's measured with IQ. And that's not the one we're going to spend much time on because, again, it is the more well-known one. But what we are going to do is we're going to go into the emotional intelligence, the spiritual intelligence, and the systems intelligence side of this conversation. And again, we're going to hear from three different members of our board, starting with my partner in crime, the person who also just recently came on the board at the same time, our board chair for marketing, who is Kate Pintor. She's also up here in the North Bay with me. And Kate is a brilliant coach and facilitator. And I actually pulled something quickly off of her bio that I want to read and make sure I get right. In her bio, it says, "Business is personal," which to me made her the perfect person to talk about this topic of emotional intelligence. So Kate, do we have you unmuted? Can I hear your voice?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you loud and clear. So can you start off, welcome first of all, and can you start off by telling us, what does this term emotional intelligence mean? How do we define emotional intelligence?
Sure. So like textbook emotional intelligence is, it's our awareness of self, our own emotions, recognizing them, understanding them, regulating them, managing them. Also this awareness of others and their emotional context. So self and others, and maybe even in a situation, knowing which to bring forth in terms of how we regulate. But what I love about the conscious leadership conversation is it implies that conscious leaders have a willingness to transcend their emotional experience. So even more than the EQ that we've understood up until now, this idea of, do I possess a willingness to transcend? So that's a willingness to listen and being others focused at times, and knowing how to hold my own emotional experience and what I'm witnessing, and observe it and not react in that, and also making room and with great care witnessing the experience of someone else. That's the difference between somebody with a high EQ and a conscious leader.
Perfect. And can you give us an example of that in terms of, in the business world, how we might see that show up?
Sure. So the first story that comes to mind is an example of someone who called me, who told me they are, they've been doing a phenomenal job working within a company. They've had some level of success. I'm just looking here, and I think we need to mute.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. So.
Okay, great. So they'd come to a certain point with their IQ. Their IQ could take them so far within a company. And they noticed that there was a value placed on empathy, and they couldn't quite tap into it. It wasn't something they could carve into. So what was missing for them was not this ability to understand it or regulate, but this level of care, that was missing within their own leadership. And so there was only so far that they could go in management and in being trusted with people, because their score would have been lower in that capacity. And so people don't want to work with somebody who has no empathy. It's very difficult at some point, but that takes you so far. And maybe there's boardrooms where that's helpful. But this next wave of what we're doing in the conscious movement makes room for this other level of care, which provides, long-term relationships with employee, increased work joy, raises profits, because people want to work to their optimal performance because they feel seen and heard and valued. And there's a resilience muscle. It's like doing sit-ups in this emotional work, where this resilience comes and people become more fit to work in the diverse communities that this next age will require. Because we're looking at bringing all kinds of people together from very different walks of life, and it will require this skill set in this next age of conscious leadership. Sorry,
Awesome.
I get excited about that.
Yeah, you're embodying the emotional intelligence paradigm. So it's awesome. And you mentioned resiliency, which I suspect is a part of the answer to my other question, which is one of the things that we've talked a lot about in recent months as we've been moving forward with the board activities, is with this conscious capitalism movement, to really focus on both sides of that equation, to focus not only on the consciousness, but also on the capitalism and the wonderful research and information that's in the book and as part of the movement about how, as a business, we can actually be more successful and more profitable by embodying and practicing these principles. So in terms of emotional intelligence, can you talk a little bit about how that would translate, how it would not just be on the consciousness side, but also really on the capitalism side, the profitability side?
For sure. Well, you definitely can measure engagement as a factor in this. So if you're looking at employee engagement, EQ has a great deal to do with what those numbers are going to be. So what helps people come in, and really there's this lens of are you training people to observe what those thoughts are within the company? Are we having those conversations to understand how we're viewing each other inside of that space? And I think the engagement numbers are pretty spectacular, but I copied over, and I'm just going to read some bullets that I thought were great values, which I think apply to all the intelligences. But if you can just bear with me for 1 second, this feels appropriate. And so a study of over 40 Fortune 500 companies revealed that salespeople with high emotional intelligence outperformed those with medium to low by 50%. And so those are some great numbers. 20 times more productive than those with a lower score, stability of staff, worker satisfaction, improved risk management. Those are some interesting numbers as well. Changing the customer service conversation, better organizational communication, 47% greater return to shareholders with less communicative firms. And so there's a lot of hard numbers and data on this that are available also.
Love it. Love it. And, it does, in my experience, absolutely translate. So before we move on, is there anything else that you want to add to the conversation about emotional intelligence as one of these?
Yeah, it's something that just really stands out for me in my own work from this is this, how do you, people ask, how do we transcend that place, that willingness to try on other conversations? And I think we can have this intellectual conversation about it, but there's some level of vulnerability and this authenticity that as conscious leaders, we have to model that. That's what's up for us. Modeling this level of vulnerability without shame with each other in that emotional context. So not compartmentalizing and intellectualizing about the emotions, but being in the mess of it, which we model as a team. This board is like, we're in all of it. Like, I love how Steve says it's messy, and it's like, it's going to be messy, but we're still going to be here. And that implies that is it safe? Are we creating environments? Are we the ones that are going forth and creating the safety to be in the mess and still have incredible compassion and care? I mean, that's what we get to do together. So I just kind of close it up with that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. And I love the reminder that the emotional is a whole spectrum. It's not all, happy, joy, rainbows and unicorns. Sometimes the beauty comes in the more uncomfortable emotions, but being comfortable with that uncomfortable. So thank you so much. And as we do transition from one of these conversations into the next, I would invite people, because we are kind of whizzing through, and again, just sticking our toe in the water and touching just the basis, the beginning, if you will, of this conversation. Just as we're finishing up on emotional intelligence and getting ready to move on, consider, based on what you heard from Kate, like, how can you apply this? How does this fit into your world? How can you become a more effective leader in this specific area called emotional intelligence? And as we do that, we will move forward, and I will bring on my next, I was going to say victim, but she's not a victim at all. The next person that we're going to hear from is Johanna Lyman. And as I said, Kate is up in the North Bay holding up that anchor. Johanna is down in the South Bay. She is our South Bay chair. She runs our events down there. She has her own amazing coaching and consulting company, and she has one of the best taglines ever. I told her this when I first met her, and I went online and looked at her work. Her tagline is that she helps companies become great places to work. To me, that's like a total mic drop tagline, so I love that. So Johanna, do we have you on mic and live?
I think so. Can you hear me?
You are. I can hear you loud and clear. Welcome, and thank you so much for doing this. We should say, just for anybody who knows Steve, they know that we had to arm wrestle Steve out of being the one who spoke to the spiritual intelligence side, but Johanna is equally qualified. So we'll make sure Steve stays muted on this one. But welcome, and thank you for being willing to do this. And just as I asked Kate about emotional intelligence, can we start by just having you give us your definition, how you look at what spiritual intelligence really is?
Yeah, spiritual intelligence is probably my favorite. So thank you for allowing me to speak on this one. To me, it is our connection to truth, goodness, beauty, and wholeness. It's the intelligence that allows us to access our deepest meaning, our values, our purpose in the world, and our intrinsic motivations, the stuff that gets us out of bed every morning, even if nobody's paying attention. At the very base of it, it's our moral compass. It's our ability to discern between right and wrong and to do the right thing, even when it's not easy. And I would say I'm like noticing the messy conversations that we have here a lot. And it's true, we can be super messy, but spiritual intelligence is actually the thing that makes it feel not messy. I highly doubt that anybody listening to this call is going to get off and say, wow, that was really messy. And that's because of the spiritual intelligence and the great camaraderie that we bring together as a board.
Absolutely. So in terms of bringing it into the workplace, can you give us an example of where the spiritual intelligence would show up, what it might look like in the workplace?
Yeah, I've got two quick examples. One is, and one of the basic philosophies of my organization is that we believe that every company, every organization has an innate intelligence to it. And it's the job of the leaders to tune in and listen to what wants to emerge. So a leader with a high degree of spiritual intelligence has the ability to tune in, to listen, and sometimes to see what is the thing that wants to birth from this company. What is the next thing for it? And so it's easier for a leader with high spiritual intelligence to steer the ship in the right direction, and also to course correct faster, generally speaking, than someone with a lower degree of spiritual intelligence. I was just flipping through the field guide earlier today to make sure I wasn't missing anything. And an example that they used was when Howard Schultz took back the reins of Starbucks in 2009 after they went through a really rough patch and they had negative store-for-store sales. They had to take like a $324 million write-off, closing stores and laying people off. And he just said, wait a minute, this is not right. And within just 2 years, he had turned the sales positive again. And that came, I think it took a great degree of spiritual courage to step back into that arena when, he'd made his money. He could have easily just said, not my circus, not my monkeys. Mm-hmm. But he didn't. And I think that, so leaders with a high degree of spiritual intelligence, they tune in, they can receive the guidance that they need, and they're not afraid to say, wait a minute, I got to stop. I got to pause. Let's just tune in and see what's needed right now.
So in terms of a leadership quality, that ability, like you use the word pause, which is huge, in order to be able to listen. And I think the Starbucks example is a great one because the previous leadership team, the interim leadership team, had access to all that same data, if you will, but they weren't using it, right? But Howard Schultz had the leadership quality, the ability to be deeply connected to that sense of purpose and to really hear it, to really listen to it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. When we've got a high degree of spiritual intelligence, it helps us to inform the actions that we take versus having to be the doer or the maker. And if it's okay, Robert, I'm seeing a question here in the chat that we talk about leaders having spiritual intelligence. What about the need to have followers who are spiritually intelligent? Is it okay if I derail your last question?
No. We're really good on time right now. So no, go for it.
Great. From that perspective, like I would say that the easy answer to that is that anybody who has the ability to take that pause, to tune in, what is the thing that wants to move through me right now? That helps whether you're, a mother, soccer team coach, a CEO of a company, a data entry clerk. Like, it can help everybody because it really, one of my favorite things about spiritual intelligence is that by slowing down, I actually get way more done. And I've had people reflect that to me like, holy cow, how do you get so much done in such a short period of time? It's because I'm not the doer. I'm listening, and I'm letting my actions be informed by this innate intelligence that is moving through me. And hopefully that helped Chris, it looks like, was asking the question.
Yeah, it's a great question too. And as I listen to you, I hear kind of the principle of a true leader really connected to purpose in the way you're talking about is a true leader, regardless of whether anyone is following them or not. And exactly. Sometimes when these really profound principles are brought into an organization, some of the people who really aren't on board with that kind of purpose-driven leadership will go by the wayside. And it's not a matter of trying to get them to follow, but to try and get people who really are on board to follow. So it's a really great question. And I think we still do have time actually for the one other thing that we were going to talk about.
All right.
And again, I think it goes to the idea of really looking at this through the business lens. And it's so, I think for many of us, it's really easy to dive deep into the consciousness and the spirituality, but of all the intelligences that we're talking about today for kind of mainstream, normal, if there is such a thing, business, spirituality is sometimes not a word that's really welcome. But how do you see that spiritual intelligence, how do you see that it is so valuable? Like, how would you describe the real value of spiritual intelligence on the business side?
Okay, from my own lens, it makes life way easier and way more fun.
Are we all in for that? Can we have a vote in the chat box? Who's in for easier and more fun?
Yeah. You spend less time in chaos, drama, confusion. You don't second guess yourself so often. It still happens, but it's way less often. You're less likely to lead your organization or your team in the wrong direction. And I think I want to just put an exclamation point around this. You get more done with less time and less effort. And if that doesn't impact the bottom line, I don't know what does.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I hear you talking, I hear that element of, people who really show up in their business and in their life in this way, they're getting so much done. And it may look like they're working really hard, but to them, it doesn't really feel like hard work. They're just on purpose doing what they're here to do. And it's not that effort, struggle kind of mentality. So
right.
Perfect.
You get to spend way more time in that flow state.
Yep.
And that's where the magic happens.
Okay. So anything that you want to add about this concept of spiritual intelligence before we move on?
Yeah, I think it's especially important now in this era of Me Too and with our country being as incredibly divisive as it is, that being able to tap into the spiritual intelligence helps us to remember that I am you, you are me. I'm no different than the person with the lowest paying job in the company. And I'm no different than the person with the highest paying job in the company. We all have value. We all bring something important to the table.
We'll just let that one settle in for a moment. Thank you. And again, as we make a transition, I would invite people, as we kind of complete this part of the conversation about spiritual intelligence, to reflect back on what Johanna has shared with us and just think about your own role, your own business, and how might you be able to show up more as a really effective leader in this area of spiritual intelligence. Perfect. Thank you, Johanna, our South Bay anchor. And we're going to move now into the third intelligence, and we have a perfect segue from this conversation about deep purpose, because Dominic Natalizio, how did I do? Is that close?
Really good. That was
yeah?
Good. Yeah.
I have to confess, I called Dominic this afternoon to get a clarification of the pronunciation of his last name. And fortunately, he says it on his voicemail message, so I got it. It was perfect. Welcome, my friend, my brother. And Dominic is our representative from San Francisco. So we've got Steve from the East Bay, and Kate from the North Bay, and Johanna from the South Bay, and Dominic right dead smack in the middle, to talk about this concept of systems intelligence. And based on what I know of your work with Lyft, you're anchored in both the real purpose side that Johanna was talking about, and also on this systems side. So tell us, again, as we started with the other two, help us understand what we mean by systems intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. So systems intelligence is a little bit of an art and a science in my opinion. So it's the ability to see the the interconnected parts of a system such that you can zoom out and see the pretty picture, or zoom in and see all the intricate details that go into it. And so I would kind of make an analogy and say, from like an organizational perspective, understanding the way you want to go as an organization, and then how you get there. And so, what's the goal? And then zooming in. Okay, how do we make that happen? And zooming in and going a level deeper. The book does a really good job of breaking it down into two main areas that are systems thinking and systems feeling. And systems thinking is mostly about understanding, what's the impact going to be on all parts of the system. So really getting into who are all the stakeholders that will be affected by a decision or a change, what have you. And conscious capitalism does a really good job of including the environment and community, and thinking of those as chief stakeholders of an organization. And then systems feeling, I think, is more about having a sense as a leader of if you're aligned as an organization. And so, are all your people running in the same way or similar direction? And how do you design that system such to make that happen? So a little bit, I think, in terms of, how does your organization show up in the world, and how do you design your organization as a leader?
Beautiful, beautiful. So just as I asked Kate and Johanna, can you give us an example of how that shows up and what it might look like in our organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I was reminded of a really cool case study from Patagonia, thinking about this a little bit. And it was around a decision they made to use organic cotton. And so this was back in, I think, the 90s, and they made this decision. And it was really in alignment with their purpose to be, a sustainable brand and good to the environment. And so, traditional cotton uses a lot of pesticides and toxic chemicals that they wanted to, eliminate from their supply chain. And so what could have been, an easy business switch, if you were just looking from, at your business as the only stakeholder at the table, well, let's just buy organic cotton, and then we've solved our problem. But what instead they did is they really considered all the stakeholders at the table. Their goal was to use less pesticides and get more, producers producing organic cotton. So just making a switch to buy somewhere else wouldn't make a lot of sense in achieving what their real purpose was behind their decision. And so they worked with their suppliers to transition into growing organic cotton. They changed their production processes, realizing that organic cotton is going to have a different impact on their products than traditional. And they really took it upon themselves to communicate, and knowing they had to communicate the value of this switch, because it was going to make the price of their product go up. So how can they still keep their customers happy? And so I think that's just a few examples of how they're looking across all the stakeholders involved in that decision, and how they should show up in order to kind of live that change that they want to make. And I want to so I think that's the systems thinking side. Who are the stakeholders at the table? And then I want to make, one more example that, one more piece of the example I want to illustrate is, then it's, okay, so how are you as Patagonia aligned to make decisions like this in the future as you source products, what have you? And so they developed a product design philosophy and aligned their organization around, what are the types of products we're trying to create as an organization. So it didn't come to this point of having to make a big switch and transition into organic cotton. It would be something that the organization will be working towards organically, no pun intended, because of the design of the system.
Awesome. Well, and I love the way you describe it, and the example is so juicy because there's some things that we wouldn't normally think of as systems that clearly are systems. And I also love the fact that we can look through the lens of all of the different stakeholders to make sure we don't miss some of those systems that we might not normally think of as systems.
Absolutely.
Awesome, awesome. So here's another question. I think we can even look at it over the lens of all three of the intelligences, but we'll look at it starting with just specifically with systems intelligence. And that is, like, how can we as leaders, and we have over 50 people who joined us on the call today. So that's awesome. We have 50 powerful leaders who are here. And how can we really integrate this idea of systems intelligence into our role, into our business? Can you give us some suggestions for specific things we can do to really integrate it into our business?
Yeah, absolutely. And so systems get big and messy. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. And I think, this mantra of continuous improvement is really important when you think of a system, because there's so many connected pieces. You're probably not going to get it 100% right when you design it, the first, second, or third time. How do you adapt and continuously evolve? I think there's probably, there's three things that come to my mind, I think, in terms of, how do you develop, systems intelligence as a leader and within your organization. The first is first knowing, who all the stakeholders are at the table. And, when you have that kind of a view, you're making decisions or designing the system, for the overall good of all those stakeholders and not just looking at it from one vantage point. I think, it kind of stems into my second point, which is, really understanding the stakeholders that are at the table and what is their perspective, what are their goals and objectives. Design thinking is a really interesting methodology that you can use to get in somebody's shoes and kind of live from their perspective and think of what are their goals and objectives and where your business be making a positive or negative impact in their life. And so going through that kind of process can help just surface the goals and intentions, like I said, of your other stakeholders, and that kind of ingrains itself in your decision making, I think, just having that in mind. And I think the last thing I think is a good way to look at the effects of a system is to imagine the exaggerated case. And so, if you were to flip the switch, like Patagonia, if they were to just switch to organic cotton, and then they took a look and said, okay, what would happen to my supplier? What would happen to my customer? That really helps you get a feel for, okay, my supplier, it supplies, say 50% of the cotton to Patagonia. We'd be putting them out of business. Is that something we want to do? And, our customer is going to pay a lot more. We need to explain ourselves here. And so just imagine that exaggerated case, I think, can help you see what the challenges, I guess, that you have to navigate.
Beautiful. Yeah, and as you describe it, it's not only the exaggerated case, but it's looking ahead, right? It's looking forward, getting out of the present moment and anticipating what's going to come from those changes. So beautiful. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we've covered briefly emotional intelligence and briefly spiritual intelligence and briefly systems intelligence. And again, we want everyone to consider how can you apply this conversation? How can you apply this increased awareness into your own life and your own business? Our commitment is not to have this just be information that's shared, but have it be really applicable information. And Steve is going to give us a couple of resources to close out the call today that will allow you to take this conversation a little bit deeper if you're interested, and obviously staying engaged and connected to the CCBA chapter. Join us for our upcoming meetings. Join us as we continue to do these online events, which clearly have a demand, as we, again, had more than 50 people join us at our first try today. And before I turn it over to Steve, I want to read a quick long sentence, short paragraph out of the book that I think really kind of summarizes this in a way, and really focuses on that application piece. And In the book, it says a crucial difference between the different types of intelligence is that a person's IQ does not easily change very much after adulthood begins, while emotional, spiritual, and systems intelligences can be developed and enhanced our entire lives. So again, that's what we chose to focus on today. That's why we chose to focus on it. It is an area that we can actively make a choice and a commitment to make improvements and do things better and do things differently. And hopefully this conversation today has been helpful to allow people to do that. And it has been a conversation that has been remarkably on time as we had planned it. And Steve, if I'd have told you that I was going to hand it back to you at 2 minutes past our scheduled time, would you have ever believed me?
Probably, but I'm dangerously optimistic. So.
Well, back to you, brother. And thank you again for your leadership in making all this happen. And I'll let you, to use your word, bring it home.
Sounds good. First, just huge appreciation and props for just an incredible introduction by Kate, by Robert, by Dominic, and Johanna. And each, I think what I loved most about that whole thing, and by the way, guys, don't hang up because there's some goodness coming in this next 10 minutes. And very little of that is the way that I would say any of that stuff, which I think is awesome, because we all have our own relationship to this movement. We all have our own unique expression of the movement, and we all bring a different piece to the puzzle. And when we come together as a community, the picture gets more and more clear. And I think that's what's so gorgeous about it, is that when we're in the practice, when we're doing the work and we're chopping wood and carrying water, which, as Johanna said, it can be the lightest load we can carry when we come from true heart, when we come from this place of service. This is what's creating the new game of business. And it's beautiful because, in many ways, while it's been the foundation of every great business that's ever existed and thrived in the world, we're making this up as we go. We talk about paving the road as we're driving the car. We're totally freestyling this. And so there's a piece for everyone to bring their own unique contribution. And a lot of what I heard throughout the whole thread of this conversation was to really recognize and honor the interconnected and interdependent nature of this journey we're on right now. And it's more important than ever to see each other fully, to hold space for each other, to see the best in each other, and to assume positive intent, to be able to know that we're all doing the best we can based on the view of the world and how we feel that we can make a difference. So whatever level of consciousness or intelligence you meet people at, it's coming at that with a great curiosity and great compassion. And I think that all of you guys model that so beautifully today. So I like to look at this body of intelligences and this whole movement in general, kind of as these four tenets really relating to what you could call like the universal truths of doing good in business. John Mackey and Raj and the great, founding mothers and fathers of the movement, they really did a beautiful job to create a possibility and a framework for us to practice in. And that's the invitation, is to invite you guys to really learn and practice the skills of the new economy, to be part of this community of practice with us in the Bay Area, but also with every one of the geographic areas of these 40 chapters around the world. We've got DJ and Danny from San Diego. I know we've got folks from Brazil here. We've got folks from Germany on the line. This is really a global community, and we're all better together. So the invitation really is that if this resonated with you, get close to the fire. Right? Join the tribe, be part of the family. And there's lots of ways to be able to do that. It's number one, go to our website at consciouscapitalismbayarea.org and get on the mailing list so that you're in the loop if you're not already for upcoming events, because we'll be doing things in the North Bay, East Bay, South Bay, as Robert had mentioned. But also just consider, if this really speaks to you, if you want to be part of this, you want to be deeper in the practice, you can be a volunteer. You can come and just be a kind person at the door at our events if you want to do it on your terms. If you want to be part of a committee or be interested in being a more active role, there's lots of ways to serve and contribute, and we would love to have you as part of the working team that creates a space for this conversation in the world. There's also the opportunity to really look at the big thing, the big picture, connect to consciouscapitalism.org, get on their mailing list, see what's happening globally in this movement so you have the broader lens. And consider coming to either the CEO Summit, which is happening in just a couple of weeks, which happens every year, or the international conference that happens usually this year. It's going to be in Phoenix, and I believe it's April-ish. But I've been the last 6 years in a row, and you will never be more inspired than being with a tribe of like-minded people. I think the last one was 850 or so. And this just feels like the combination of a family reunion and the most inspired personal development weekend you could ever do. So these are the pieces. Get the book, check out the field guide, take a look at what's happening with the Conscious Capitalism Activator and the folks that are really stewarding the community to take these ideas and put them into action. And let's see, let me make sure I don't forget anything else. Oh, we've got a little gift to give you as an appreciation of just being with us today, is to deepen the learning. I did an interview with Jess Peabody. She was the previous community director for the entire global movement of conscious capitalism. And she came from 10 or 15 years with Whole Foods Market. And she has such a beautiful lens of these three intelligences. And it's a video with an interview that kind of walks into that. That we'll send you as the link as part of that. We'll also send you a link to be able to become part of the tribe at any level of membership at a discount if that speaks to you. You can come as a student, you could come as an individual. There's a bunch of value behind the scenes of being part of that tribe and just supporting our cause if that's important to you. And you can also take a look at, being a collaborative brand partner, a sponsor with us. There are different things where we showcase and highlight your business. You're on the website, but it's all an invitation with no expectation whatsoever. The heart's message is that, look, there's a new game in business. This is the game of conscious business. It's moving the needle. It's leading the change. It's more enjoyable. It's more meaningful. It's more profitable. And it starts with you right there. You in your seat have the capacity to change the world, or at least the world in your environment, by getting close to these ideas, by sharing about it, by getting curious with people, and just really contributing and being part of this global conversation. So I want to thank all of you for the heart that you put into the hosting this call, the team here in the Bay Area. I want to thank all of you that are out on the grid already practicing and playing in this sandbox with us, and to just continue this conversation by getting close to the fire. And we are so excited to be here and to continuously serve you, and just look forward to continuing the journey. So Robert, is there anything else that I left out or you want to bring home before we close this up?
I don't think so. We had an email address I thought that you wanted to share, just if people did have questions. We really didn't have a lot of time to allocate to Q&A today. We're finishing right at the top of the hour. But if people do have questions either about what we talked about today or about the organization and the different levels from international to Bay Area to the regions within the Bay Area, we have an email address they can reach out to, right?
We do. We have we're transferring to our own domain, but we have a Gmail address that's called Bay Area Concap, CONCAP @gmail.com. You can also go to the forum on our website at consciouscapitalismbayarea.com. And then, of course, on our events page, there's upcoming events. You can see the one happening on November 11th in the South Bay with Tina Dow from Fitbit, talking about conscious leadership. We will be hosting 3 or 4 more events before the end of the year. Say again?
October
11th.
October 11th. Thank you very much. And yes, so we just want to know how we can support the community. So to the degree you let us know your thoughts, your concerns, your ideas, your suggestions, it's just going to keep getting better. So Robert, if you want to open up for 5 minutes before we get to the top of the hour, just for any questions that are burning, we could take at least a couple to fill out the full hour commitment that we made, if that's something you like to do.
I got a wife in Australia, so I'm up for it.
Awesome. So look, if
people want to unmute themselves, there should be, if you're on your computer, there's a button in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If you scroll over your screen, that button will come live. You can also type a question into the chat, and we can take a couple of questions.
I just wanted to appreciate you guys for pulling this together. I thought that this was a beautiful format for micro learnings and really presenting the ideas, kind of warming the logs. And as we know in the Bay Area, sometimes it's a challenge to get places physically. So coming together to share ideas and insights this way, I think is a huge service. So just wanted to give props for that.
Thank you so much. And it brings up a good point too. Steve gave you that email address. I typed it into the chat box. If people have suggestions or requests for topics or issues that you'd like to see addressed in this format, we are going to continue to do this, and certainly welcome feedback from the group about topics and themes and people we could even bring in potentially as speakers to share in this format. So thank you.
That's beautiful. Yeah, another thing we do, if there are questions, cool, we'll take them. But another thing we love to do is close out the call with an appreciation round. If there's anybody who wants to just pipe up and say, here's what I loved, here's what hit me in the heart, here's what I can't unknow now, that's another alternative to a question. It takes a lot less time and it adds a lot more love to the space. So anybody got an appreciation or a question, either one?
Or we can hit the Jeopardy music.
Yeah, that's it. And then also there's some tribe members here. There's chapter leaders from around the globe. If you're on the call from somewhere else and you want to share an inspiration or something you loved about it, or just anything that opened up, share the love, throw some appreciation out, and we'll close it up in just a minute or two.
There's a question in the chat. How does one apply these principles as a solopreneur? How can you actually get paid to do this work solely? It's a big question.
Yeah, we could drive a truck through that opening right there, I'll tell you. But
we have a whole nother presentation about that.
I think that's, Robert, it's a great point to catch, is like, how do practitioners that are resonant with this work, how do they start that work? Because what I've learned is the people that are best at this dance, they have the backdrop of a coach, a consultant, and that really is just means that they come from curiosity. They start with questions rather than starting with telling and teaching. And I know that largely today was more of a one-way download, but really it's about getting in the practice, because as you're in the practice, the ability to dance with those moving objects and with these ideas becomes very quickly in the muscle, because it's so heart-based. And so that's the tease that I would give just for that first cut, and say, yeah, more to follow. Let's dig deeper into that. Like, take a whole scoop of that thing. So any appreciations, last minute or two, anything you want to share before you have to say it before we cap up?
Well, and I would throw in, as far as that solopreneur question, I think it came up earlier on the call, but this whole idea of leadership sometimes falls into the trap of thinking that you need to have a whole bunch of people following you. But some of the most powerful leaders I know are solopreneurs. They're out there, they're doing the things Johanna talked about really being on purpose and being vision and mission driven. And even though they don't have a big organization around them, they're very powerful leaders. So the solopreneur does not take you out of the conversation by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, and I would just say that, I'd say this really gets down to how you show up. This is a way of being as a conscious leader. It's not something you do, it's something you show up inside of, and a way to serve that really is inclusive, holistic, thoughtful, heart-based, and genuinely committed to the greater good for all. And with that, you can't mess it up if you come from that place. So what I often say,
and if you do that truly, you won't be a solopreneur for long.
That's true.
Stephen, I want to share an appreciation. I really want to share an appreciation for your entire chapter, because I know this was a pilot program, but what really struck me about the program was the many levels that you communicated on. And on the one hand, there was this incredible, just tremendously valuable information framing it out. But it really struck me that as you were sharing the information, you were also embodying each of those intelligences yourself. You were speaking from your heart. There was this incredible sense of community. So I just want to really kind of just express to you not only the information that was conveyed, but the inspiration, what your chapter has highlighted in terms of what we can all aspire to contribute around. So just thank you.
Danny, thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you, my friend. And we're so honored by that comment. And you know, that's why we do it. That's why we show up inside of this, because it's the coolest game in town with the coolest kids in town, and we get to play and serve and continue to just, you know, try it on and mess it up and clean it up and keep working and keep iterating and keep serving, and that's what this new world is about. Is if I can't feel you, I don't trust you. We're too sold. We're too marketed to. That's why I wanted to make sure you guys knew up front. There's no big program coming at the end. We're not trying to hard sell anything. This is like, we're here to serve, and we're excited to be on that journey. So let's call it complete at the top of the hour. Thank you to all of you who contributed. Kate, Robert, Johanna, Dominic, wonderful job. So grateful to be on the path. Talk to you guys soon, and we look forward to seeing all of you on the next event.
Thanks again for joining us, everyone. It's just the start of a conversation.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, friends. Appreciate all of you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Hey, there's Mike. Hey, Mike.
Namaste.
All right, guys. Be well.
Bye-bye.